Thank you so much for joining Creative Vision Media's The Entrepreneurial Huddle, Government Contracting 101, Evaluating the Contract, Session 3. So if you listened to Sessions 1 and 2, you were first told how to understand the request for proposal process, meaning what are the requirements in terms of insurance and bonding, employee staffing. For example, if the contract requires responsible wages and you are a plumber that pays your plumber $22 an hour, but the contract requires $30 an hour and benefits, are you able to maintain that level of staffing through the duration of the contract? And what happens if you start to pay that employee $30 an hour and the contract is over a year later? They're accustomed to earning $30 an hour plus benefits. Will they stay? So that's something to consider when you're pursuing a request for proposal. Also, what are the payment terms? Does this entity pay within 15 days, 30 days, 45 days? And if the entity pays within 15 days, what is the prime contractor's payment terms? And it is important to understand what the prime contractor's payment terms are and making sure that you understand what those requirements are. And I'm sure those terms include keeping the insurance and the bonding active, etc. But you can hear more about that in session number 1, the things that you must consider. In session number 2, we talked about things that you should consider and do once you have been awarded a government contract. Some of the things we covered are getting to know the contract manager for the client, knowing who they are, understanding their role on the project, whether or not they are the final decision maker, and who's their assistant. So if you can't reach them and there's some sort of challenge, you certainly have someone to reach out to get an answer for you. And a lot of people say, well, if you are the sub, why are you reaching out to the client? Because you want to separate yourself from all of the other subs or subcontractors or subconsultants that are performing on the job. And you want the entity to always think of you if there's similar work that comes up on another project, because you've made the effort to develop the relationship. And of course, that should be organic. It should not be forceful or disrespectful or unprofessional, but certainly it should demonstrate your interest in learning more about the entity and making yourselves available to offer more services. Equally important is making sure that you have further developed a relationship with the prime contract manager. So of course you have some sort of surface level relationship because you won the bid. You're now a part of the group performing the work, but you want them to understand that your level of operation is necessary, right? And understand the value of your company so that they can consider you for other opportunities. And then of course we talked about understanding who are the players when it comes to payment processes. Because when you're working on government contracts, remember now, governmental employees are very receptive because they know they work for the public. So for them, they are open to any question that you may have related to their processes and performing well on a contract. And payment, timely payment, is equivalent to high performance on any contract for a small business. So understand, what is the accounting process? Is it 30 days? Is it 15 days? And knowing who on the client side manages the pay app or the invoice. So when you call them, if you have a challenge and they say to you, well, we're now on day 15 in your review and it has 3 more steps, at least you'll know it's almost done and it's headed to you. But if you get there and they say, well, right now it hasn't even been reviewed and you have submitted that pay app or invoice 45 days ago, that's very concerning. So it's important that you develop those relationships, understand when it's approved every month, and who you will call if there is a delay. Equally important for the prime contractor, understanding who reviews your invoice, who approves it, and who authorizes payments. And it's also necessary to understand how long does it take from the review to the approval to have it approved for payment, because there are 2 different steps. There's a review, there's an approval, and then there's an approval for payment. Because when you're dealing with a governmental entity, the private contractor is not going to release your payment until their payment has been released. So that's 2 steps in the approval process. That's why it's so necessary to really understand the RFP and the payment terms outlined in the RFP related to the governmental entity. And then we talked about the master agreement, but you want to hear more about that, you're going to have to tune into session number 2. Now, for session number 3, it is absolutely critical that you evaluate the contract. So let me go back. I skipped ahead too early. So it's absolutely necessary that you evaluate the contract. So this includes, you've closed out the contract, your team is off the job, you're no longer performing as a construction, or you're no longer consulting. You should have a time period once the contract is closed out where you evaluate the contract and you identify the wins and challenges of the project that you can apply going forward, or that you can offer to a future client going forward. So you say to yourself, would I work with this entity again? What are the benefits and what are the cons? Were the payment terms beneficial to my company, or did the payments hurt my company because they were so delayed? I was slow paying my payroll or paying my vendor, and it really impacted my performance. Or were you in a situation where this project led to another project and your scope was continuously broadened as a result of being on this project? So that would demonstrate a win, but certainly understand what the challenges are. And you say to yourself, looking at this, once you've concluded, the prime contractor's relationship was valuable for my company, or it presented challenges for my company. And what would I do differently if I were given the opportunity to work with this company again? And it probably goes back to step 2, where we talked about checking in with your contract manager. Don't assume everything is going well, but call them to find out, especially if you're the owner and you're not working specifically on this project or contract. Make sure you understand that everything is going well and that there are no surprises coming down the pipeline. And it's important as the owner to understand, does the prime contractor and the client like the person that you've assigned to the contract? Maybe they like your company, but the person that you've assigned is not really gelling with the company or with the client. So that's why it's important to be a great listener and to really engage, so they can pick up the phone and say, hey, we really like your guy, but can you make him get here on time? The concrete pour is at 4 in the morning and he's always here at 4:30 in the morning. So we really like him, but he's really struggling. We understand he's coming from an hour away, but maybe you put somebody else in on those days that the pours are coming. You only find that out, and hopefully you develop a relationship where they pick up the phone and tell you that. You only find that out by constantly being engaged on every project that you're performing for a client. And then you say to yourself, how do I maximize this experience for future projects? And this is where your website is updated, your marketing materials are updated, your capability statements are updated, and then all of this information is shared with your team, because it's now the most recent project for your company, and figure out what sets this particular contract aside from other contracts. What makes this contract so unique? And use that language to update your capability statement, to send a thank you note to the client and the prime contractor for the opportunity to work with them. But it's key that as you go through the project, you constantly promote it in your marketing materials, on your social media, in your presentations for other bids. You constantly use this experience, if you performed well, to promote your company. That is absolutely necessary. That is the point of doing it. A lot of people fail to translate this experience to the opportunity, experience to future opportunity, experience to marketing opportunity. So that is critical for this process in post-award. And then you must go back to the contract award and determine, How long am I required to keep these documents related to this contract? For governmental entities, sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 5 years. But you must find out how long are you required to keep records of the contract. Next, you must also determine your team's performance. Was the location of the project a hardship on your team? Was the process of accessing the location difficult on your team? Or was the location convenient? Should you have set up a small office near the site to make it more convenient for your team to move back and forth and produce documents and manage the contract, etc.? What should you have done differently so that your team's performance would not have been hindered? Did you assign the right staffers to the project? Because sometimes we look back and say, wow, maybe X, Y, and Z should have handled this project, or that person was the perfect fit for this project. If I pursue work with this prime or this client in the future, I'm going to use the same exact person because they really liked their work ethic and they really liked them as a person. So all of those things should come in mind when you have a closeout evaluation of a project, and develop an internal checklist for each project where your team sits down, talks about the pros, talks about the cons, talks about the things that they like. For example, for some clients, they have a rule where if they send an email, there should be a response within 2 hours. Others have it for 24 hours. Was that a hindrance? Did that change your operation style? Because sometimes you may have people over a project that are working on other projects or out in the field or whatever it is, and it may take a little while. Or did you say, let's change our model where one person is copied on all the emails to make sure we have a more thorough response to the client in that regard? And these may seem like little things, but they're necessary things, and they demonstrate your working relationship. And then lastly, in terms of post-closeout evaluation, was the contract a win? Did the relationship work? Do you think you're going to pursue more work with this entity? Were the responsible wages or payment requirements too stiff for your small company? Or was there no impact and your team got to perform at a higher level, and now you're going to stay at that level and continue to pursue work at the higher level of this new project? Because sometimes certain projects take smaller companies to another level. So did it open your team up to more high-end work, more work that required more regulations, more requirements, more evaluations? For example, if you're used to doing work with just a county entity, did it now require a municipal oversight? Did it now require some state input? All of those factors really help to grow your company as a team and your knowledge base. And then lastly, you have to say to yourself, what are the overall benefits of this contract to our company? And that's where you capture that in your team members' resumes, in the owner's resumes. This is the opportunity to get a quick testimonial from the client and from the prime that you incorporate in future presentations. All of this now must be captured. Don't wait until there's a presentation that's similar to the project that you worked on and reach back 6 months later and say, hey, can we get a quick letter of reference? No, get it right away, because you never know, someone may leave their position, or the ideas and the steps that you took to really solve a problem are not fresh in their mind. Be sure to get that information right away. And as always, here at the Entrepreneur Huddle, provided by Creative Vision Media, we thank you so much for stopping by to hear session number 3. Just a little bit of information about how to evaluate the contract at the end of the contract. Does it work for your firm? Was it a win? And if you completed the job, how do you maximize that experience for yourself, for your as the owner, for your team individually and professionally, and as for the company, so they can continue to grow? Stay tuned for more.